Pope Francis, the Desert Mass, that united the world. The sun rose over the Arabian desert like a flame upon the horizon. It was February 5th, 2019, a day that would be written into the chronicles of human faith. Beneath the vast dome of the sky, hundreds of thousands gathered in Abu Dhabi. The sound of prayers in dozens of languages filled the air, blending into one great hymn of hope. They were workers, pilgrims, and believers, men and women who had left their homelands to build new lives in the Middle East. They had waited through the night for a moment that once seemed impossible. And then from the great gates of Zayed Sports City Stadium, a white figure appeared. Pope Francis had come, the first pope ever to celebrate Mass in the Arabian Peninsula. As he was driven slowly through the sea of faithful, the air erupted with joy. Flags from the Philippines, India, Lebanon, Nigeria, and beyond waved together. Some cried, others prayed, others simply stared, unable to believe what they were witnessing. In a land where the call to prayer had long echoed alone, today it was joined by the ancient words of the Eucharist, "The peace of the Lord be with you always." The Mass began under a sun that seemed to bless the moment itself. Pope Francis, standing before 150,000 people, lifted the chalice high and spoke of love, forgiveness, and unity. He said, "God's love is the same for each and every one of his children. It does not distinguish between the faithful and the stranger, between the citizen and the migrant." His words cut through the heat like a cool wind. The people sang, "Hosanna in the highest," their voices echoing through the open air, a sound never before heard in that desert. Many were workers who had never seen a church that could hold them all. And now the desert itself had become their cathedral. As the choir sang, tears streamed down faces hardened by labor and distance. Men in construction helmets stood beside women in white veils. Muslims stood quietly among Christians, moved by the sight of unity that transcended creed. This was not only a mass, it was a miracle of coexistence. The Pope's homily was brief but unforgettable. He spoke not as a ruler, but as a shepherd. "Do not repay evil with evil," he said softly. "Choose peace. Choose forgiveness. Choose to be instruments of God's tenderness in the world." Every word seemed to settle on the crowd like golden dust. And when he raised the host, the body of Christ, a hush fell over the entire stadium. The world seemed to stop breathing. Even outside, in the streets of Abu Dhabi, taxi drivers and shopkeepers paused their work to watch the broadcast on their phones. The image of the Pope's hands raised in the desert would travel around the world that day, to Rome, Manila, Lagos, Mumbai, and beyond. When the final blessing came, thousands lifted their rosaries, phones, and flags into the air. The roar that followed was like a prayer in itself, a sound of gratitude, of release, of joy. And as the Pope left the altar, the people sang in unison, "Go in peace." It was not just a message, it was a prophecy. That Mass in Abu Dhabi marked something greater than an event. It was a declaration that peace between faiths was possible, not as an idea, but as a living reality. And in the years that followed, that spirit would carry Pope Francis farther than ever before, into lands still scarred by war and silence. 2 years later, he arrived in Iraq, a place once torn apart by ISIS, where Christians had fled for their lives. His plane touched down in Baghdad under the same desert sky that had witnessed his Mass in Abu Dhabi. But this time he came not to celebrate, but to heal. When he visited Mosul, he found ruins where churches once stood. Yet the people gathered anyway, singing hymns among the broken stones. Francis knelt before a charred altar, whispering a prayer for those who had died. "We are brothers and sisters," he said. "Even in the ruins, God is here." From Iraq, his mission of peace extended to Morocco, where he was welcomed by King Mohammed VI. The streets of Rabat were filled with banners bearing his image and the words, "Welcome, Holy Father." Together, the Pope and the King signed a joint declaration calling for Jerusalem to be a city of peace for all faiths. Later, at the Cathedral of St. Peter, Francis spoke to the youth of Morocco. He told them, "Do not build walls, build bridges. The crowd cheered, their applause echoing through the ancient city that had once been a crossroads of cultures. In Bangladesh, the Pope's compassion reached its most tender moment. There, he met the Rohingya refugees, men, women, and children who had lost everything. When he took their hands and said, "Your God is our God," the world stopped. No pope had ever spoken those words before. It was as if, in that moment, all barriers fell away. And then in Kazakhstan, in 2022, the frail pontiff, now in a wheelchair, stood before the Congress of World Religions, surrounded by leaders of every faith. His voice trembled but did not falter. "Let us never use the name of God to justify division," he said. "The future belongs to those who build peace." But through all these journeys, from the ruins of Iraq to the steppes of Central Asia, one image remained in the hearts of millions: the Mass in Abu Dhabi. The sight of the Pope raising the Eucharist in the desert became a symbol of the Church's new chapter, not a church of walls, but of open skies. That moment, that Mass had lit a flame that carried Francis across borders into the hearts of believers and unbelievers alike. And as the story closes, the camera pans across the desert once more, now silent, peaceful, eternal. The wind carries the echo of that day. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." The narrator's voice softens. He came to a land once thought unreachable and left behind a message the world will never forget. The Mass in Abu Dhabi was not only a celebration of faith, it was a prophecy of unity, a moment when heaven touched the sands of earth. If you believe that faith can still bring the world together, if you believe that one voice of peace can echo across nations, like, comment, and subscribe to the Papal and Royal Summit. Together we tell the stories of popes, kings, and the moments that shaped the world.